Hey everybody, Adam Davidson, RadCast for Friday, December 1st, 2023. There's a great conversation that happens in the Gospel of John. The Gospels are basically the story of Jesus and his activity on this earth. And the things that he did then are the things that he's doing now, including healing people, raising them from the dead. This doesn't happen very often, that Jesus actually goes to a funeral and people end up just sitting up in the casket. That's a very uncommon thing. And that's not what we're here to talk about today, but it does happen in the Gospel of John with a guy named Lazarus. Maybe you've heard the story. Lazarus dies. Jesus goes to the funeral and tells Lazarus to come out of the tomb, and Lazarus comes hopping out. They unwrap him from his grave bandages, and he's alive. Now, that's an incredible miracle, and it testifies to the power of Jesus, who says, "I am the resurrection and the life." It's interesting to consider, though, that at some point Lazarus did die. There was another funeral, and that time he did not sit up in the casket. He did not come hopping out of the tomb. Jesus wasn't even there in the flesh, probably, to call him out, and that eventuality is for all of us. Unless Jesus returns, we're all going to have a funeral. And the resurrection happens not on this earth during this life, but from this earth into the next life. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. I want to zero in on a conversation that Jesus has with his disciples. So here's John chapter 11. Zoom in on this story and listen close with your ears, and with your heart. Now, a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. So the sister sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." A little bit of code language there, like Jesus, one of your favorite guys, he's going to know who we're talking about. He's sick, all right? The kind of thing where you don't even have to finish the request. It's like, he's sick, and they know that as soon as Jesus hears this, he's going to come their way. And it says in verse 4, when he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." He's talking about himself. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister Mary and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days, and then said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." Now, if you love somebody, you'd think that you would immediately get there. But John says he loves them and he stays 2 more days. Another thing that we can't talk about right now, but this is the mystery of the scripture. You can ask the scripture questions. Why does he stay? We can't talk about it right now. And so he says after 2 days, let's go back to Judea. Verse 8, "But Rabbi," the disciples say, "a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and you're going to go back?" Meaning, aren't you going to die? Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they will see by the world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light." After he said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up." His disciples said, "Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get better." Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead." And that is plain language right there, hard to miss. "And for your sake," he said, "I am glad I was not there so that you may believe, but let's go to him." And then Thomas said to the rest of the disciples, "Let's also go so that we may die with him." Fascinating conversation. That's the word of the Lord. It's that conversation I want to zero in on. So to briefly and succinctly summarize, which is the only way to summarize is succinctly, this is how it goes. The words of the disciples in the whiter text, the words of Jesus in the reddish text. The disciples say, "Hey, Lazarus is sick," implying, hey, fix this. Jesus says, it won't end in death. He's not that sick. He'll be okay. Now let's go back to Judea. The disciples point out helpfully, they'll kill us there, so maybe something to reconsider, Jesus. Jesus says, there's 12 hours in a day, but anyway, let's go. He's just asleep. They say, thoughtfully, wanting to avoid the trip, if he sleeps, he'll get better. Like, let him sleep it off with the NyQuil. He'll be fine. Jesus sighs. Now, it's not in the scripture, but it's really implied, like, okay, guys, what I'm trying to tell you is he's actually dead. He's not, like, literally asleep. He's figuratively asleep. And then Thomas sarcastically says, well, then let's go and die with him, because they really think that their lives are on the line. Here's the point. Prayer is conversation. So many times prayer seems like a paperwork that we submit or a form that we fill out online. Well, I better tell God 3 things I need today, 3 things I'm thankful for, and 3 things that I should be praying about. Boom, got that sent off. Now on to the rest of my day. This is an example of a conversation, And if you think about it, when we're talking to Jesus, it's just like the disciples were talking to Jesus. He's here with us and he was there with them. It's a little different, but yet it's not. And in that conversation, things become clear. And in that conversation, you'll see that Jesus doesn't always say precisely what we need to hear because he's waiting for us to take the journey through the steps of thinking through it, feeling through it, spiritually growing through it so that we can grow to this point and come to these conclusions on our own. This is the reason that you don't do your kids' homework for them. They have to go through this to learn and to grow so that they have some mastery over a subject. In much the same way, why doesn't Jesus just fix the world? And why doesn't he just tell you exactly what you need to hear right away? Well, because first of all, if just he fixes the world, then you have nothing to do with it. And if he just tells you everything right away, then you may have something to do with it in that you're there, but you didn't go through the growth and the process of becoming who you are up to that moment. And unless you are who you are called to be in that moment, you won't be able to do what you're called to do. I hope somebody wrote that down or can clarify it for us in the comments because that's a pretty complicated sentence I just spit out. This is what Dallas Willard says. Let's get simple. He says, prayer is talking to God about what we are doing together. I like that. So prayer is not just sending in a request and shooting it up to heaven and hoping for the best. It's actually a conversation. It's one where we speak, God speaks. We speak, God speaks. And as we have this conversation with him, things become more clear for us. And that's the whole point. This is the God who cares about us, who loves us, who wants us to join him in creating and co-creating the world, and is also remarkably patient in those moments where he goes, Adam, what I've been trying to tell you the whole time is this, to which I go, oh, sarcastic comment. And he goes, I love you anyway, buddy. Let's go. Think of prayer this way. It's conversation. That's RadCast.